this discussion about salt and sugar taxes should be introduced to drive a revolution in Britain's diet, according to a government-ordered review. That's what their conclusion is. Let's now speak to Professor Graham Macgregor, who's Professor of Cardiovascular Medicine and Chairman of Action on Sugar and Action on Salt. Many things that you do. Professor, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Jim.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Talk Radio. So, it just strikes me that we've got a history of repeating ourselves. We had George Osborne saying, oh, yeah, we're going to have tax on sugary drinks. That didn't do any good. Unless you make the tax absolutely prohibitory, it's a complete waste of time and you're taxing the poor.
That is a load of rubbish. The soft drink tax was incredibly successful. It's reduced sugar intake from that particular source of sugar, which is the biggest intake in teenagers, by 35%. What it did was to get the industry to reformulate, take the sugar out, and then they didn't have to pay the tax. And this tax is exactly the same. It's to encourage the food industry to reduce the amount of salt and sugar in products and make them more healthy, and they won't have to pay the tax. So the media, as always, a very right-wing media, has totally misinterpreted what is being asked for.
Well, it's not necessarily misinterpreting. It's seeing a tax and it's saying, isn't it down to individuals to decide what they want to eat and what they don't want to eat? And if they want to eat a Mars bar, that's down to them. And it's not really down to you, the government, or anybody else to tax them.
Well, look, you don't see the front end of this. That salt is the major factor that puts up our blood pressure. Blood pressure is the major cause of strokes. 60% of strokes, 50% of all heart disease is due to salt and high blood pressure. And sugar is a major cause of tooth decay and a major cause of obesity and type 2 diabetes, which is now costing the NHS 15 billion a year. So, do you just want to sit there and let everyone get fat?
Well, not particularly. As somebody who is somebody who's regularly accused of being overweight himself.
I would never accuse you of that. It's due to the food industry that people are overweight. It's not your fault.
Well, no, it is my fault actually, because it's what I put in my mouth. I mean, where's the personal responsibility? This is ridiculous. We're blaming the food industry. We're blaming everybody but ourselves. If you are fat, it is your fault, isn't it?
I don't think it is when there's all this junk food, ultra-processed food, freely available everywhere all the time. It's shoved in your face. And as human beings, from an evolutionary point of view, we want that. We want to have more food and we get fat. We need to make it more difficult. We need to make more food more healthy and reduce consumption of all these ultra-processed foods. And by taxing them and getting the food industry, and remember, the food industry has actually asked for this. They want to be forced to do it because the responsible members of the food industry want to improve the health of their products, but they can't because of the competition.
But if you're saying it's not my fault, then why are you taxing me?
I'm not taxing you. I'm taxing the food industry to reformulate the food.
You're taxing me. If I want a Mars bar, which I shouldn't have, and by the way, under my new diet, I'm not having them. But if I wanted a Mars bar, you're going to charge me more for it. I don't want them to change the recipe. It's delicious.
I'm telling the food industry to reformulate the food so that it's more healthy and they won't have to pay the tax.
A Mars bar is never going to be a health food. What's the point?
I think it could be if you cut the sugar. You could, and
yeah, then call it granola bar or something else, and then I'll make that choice. Thanks.
I don't agree. You can make these things healthy by reformulating, and you're misinterpreting the tax by saying I'll put up the price. It may, in certain instances, I mean, they quote a classic jam that doesn't have any fruit in it. Well, I don't think that should be available. Why should you have a jam that has no fruit in, which is all sugar? I think that's wrong. I think the food industry shouldn't be allowed to and should be taxed for that sort of food.
Whereas I mean, whether that should be, and I agree with you on that as somebody who makes their own jam. But still, if you make your own jam, the very minimum amount of sugar you're going to put in is 40%, which makes it a very, very sugary food. I mean, you can't get away from the fact that jam is never going to be a healthy thing. You can make it less unhealthy, I suppose. Or are you just going to say, right, okay, well, if you make the very healthiest version of this particular food, then we're not going to tax it. But if you add an ounce or a gram more than we think should go in there, then you do. I mean, is that the way around?
That's exactly it. There's a target for sugar, just like in soft drinks. If you get normally soft drinks at 10 grams per 100 mils, 10% sugar. If you get it below 5%, 5 grams, you don't pay the tax. So what happened was all the soft drink industry, apart from Coca-Cola, reformulated all their drinks below the 5-gram level. So instantly, overnight, all the soft drinks, apart from Coca-Cola and one or two others, are all reduced by half. Now, that's a very clever tax because they don't pay the tax. All they've done is reformulate the food. So
okay, let me ask you this, though, then, because I understand that. But then if you have this situation that you are trying to persuade people or force them or change their minds on how to tax, what about things like sweetener? Because then you push them into the low sugar options. Some say that the diet colas, the diet drinks, the diet sweeteners that you can have are even more dangerous than the sugar itself.
Well, I don't think that's true. I mean, I agree. We don't want to see artificial sweeteners in our food. I don't disagree with that. But where you have to, and it's better than sugar. I mean, that's what's happened with the soft drinks. But I think the sweetness should be gradually reduced. I mean, I don't think you're aware of the very successful salt reduction policies being in the UK. All the products you buy, all the things you love have had the amount of salt in them reduced by 25 to 40% without you knowing it. So all the bread, all the crisps have all come down, and the food industry cooperated, but they're now no longer cooperating because of some of these companies refuse to do it and the others can't compete. And what we need is a way of persuading them. You can either mandate the targets, make them legally enforceable, or you can tax them so they do reformulate. I think this is if you sit down and consider it carefully and logically, this is a very sensible way because it will improve the foods we're eating without you realizing there will slowly be change. And that's what's happened to salt. And we need to continue with the salt reduction. And this tax is designed to do that.
But so then isn't the upshot of that people try the food and very often they go, oh, well, that's not salty enough, and they put their own salt on, and then they'll just shove even more on, because by the time you use some of that rather delicious Anglesey sea salt and it all crumbles in your hand, you use buckets of the stuff.
The brilliance of it is it's been done without you realizing. Do you ever go to a supermarket and buy food?
Well, I go to the supermarket regularly. I'm well aware of what they do.
Do you realize the bread you eat now has 30% less salt in than it did 10 years ago? And you don't even know that. All the bread that we eat now has less salt in without people realizing. So you can gradually change the level of salt and sugar and fat in foods without people realizing. They go on eating the same stuff. The price hasn't gone up. The food industry sells the same number of products, and everyone's happy. We've improved the food supply.
But I don't know. I take the view that if you start to have a look at some of the measures which have been proposed, some of them seem to make sense, and some of them seem to make absolutely no sense. Because what government will do is it will look at the money, it will look at the opportunity to raise more tax. They've got a massive black hole to fill. They'll say it's for our health, and it won't be for our health. It will be taxing the very poorest.
Well, I think you're too cynical. I think sometimes you should try and improve the world and try and stop people dying and suffering unnecessarily.
We've never lived so long, Graham.
Well, everyone wants to go on living. It's very, very, in my experience, I used to run a general medical intake of all the medical emergencies at St. George's for years. And in my experience, nobody wants to die. It's very rare that people want to die. They want to go on living. And this is a fundamental human characteristic. And the longer you live, the better. If you're healthy, I agree. If you're handicapped and suffering, it's not fun. But we can make people live longer and lead a healthy life and feel much better. And that's what we're aiming to do.
Well, I can understand that, but I still think, as somebody who is currently trying to do a little bit of a diet, that it's actually what one puts in one's mouth and the psychological help that one needs to help make the right choices, as opposed to just taxing things out of existence might be better.
No, we're not we're making the right choice for you because the food industry is going to reduce the amount of salt and sugar in the foods without you being aware of it. You'll have your snack. It will have less sugar or salt in it, and you won't know. So I think that's brilliant.
Well, you say that, but I just need to steer clear of the baked goods. That's the thing. They've got to go. Anyway, I really appreciate you coming on to talk to us about this. That's Professor Graham Macgregor, Professor of Cardiovascular Medicine and Chairman of the Action on Salt and Action on Sugar.